Good morning, everyone. Bonjour, mesdames, messieurs. Welcome to the 8th Annual CIMVHR Forum. To begin our program, I ask you to please rise, if you are able, as our guests enter the room. Welcome, everyone. S'il vous plaît, asseyez-vous. Please be seated and be comfortable. Good morning. Bonjour. My name is Mike Brennan. I have the honor of being your MC this week. It's a tremendous pleasure. This is our largest event ever, with nearly 700 delegates and attendees from around the world. Yes, indeed. The mission of the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research is to enhance the lives of military personnel, veterans, and their families by harnessing our capacity for research. All of you are here to support this mission and to learn from each other. But as you've no doubt noticed, this is a very special year for CIMVHR Forum. We've been joined by 5 guests who will tell us more about this historic moment. Our first speaker is familiar to nearly everyone in the room. She is co-founder and first scientific director of CIMVHR, and she's dedicated much of her research to health policy for veterans and their families. Please welcome a dear friend and Vice President, Research from Dalhousie University, Dr. Alice Aiken.
Thank you, Michael. Canada is home to a significant military population who require unique standards of health protection, prevention, and care. In 2010, the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research, CIMVHR, was established to develop a hub for research dedicated to the health needs of our military members, past and present, and their families. 7 years ago, CIMVHR hosted its first forum in Kingston as a test to gauge support for the idea of creating a network. It began as a small group full of energy and unbridled enthusiasm for the idea that together, academia, military, government, industry, and caring Canadians could make a difference. Together, we have fostered and supported world-class researchers. Their work has led to innovative new policies, practices, and programs that fulfill CIMVHR's mission to serve those who serve us. Researchers like Dr. Selina Shirazapur, who you will hear from shortly, who was inspired to focus her research on veterans by CIMVHR, supported through her doctoral research by CIMVHR funding, and who is now a Dalhousie postdoctoral fellow conducting world-leading research for the Invictus athletes and their families. That forum launched what has become the hub for thousands of researchers from 43 universities across Canada and our global affiliates from around the world. That enthusiasm and energy felt 7 years ago has never wavered. CIMVHR has continued to grow by engaging academics, facilitating new research, increasing research capacity, and fostering knowledge translation. CIMVHR's most important legacy is that the research we have sponsored has overcome well-established barriers and been translated into practices and policies rapidly. Today, of course, is a very special day, and one that we are very proud to be part of. CIMVHR is honored to be the research partner of the Invictus Games Toronto 2017. We thank CIMVHR board member and CEO of the Games, Michael Burns, for recognizing that Invictus athletes are the living fulfillment of CIMVHR's mission. What a great partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice, for your continued inspiring work on behalf of CIMVHR. Our next speaker is a long-serving member of the CIMVHR board. More recently, he assumed the monumental task of CEO of the Invictus Games Toronto 2012. The results we see in this city at this moment speak to his commitment to serving soldiers, veterans, and their families. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Michael Burns.
Good morning, everyone. How about a big hand for Michael? I'd be remiss if I didn't ask or begin this morning by asking all those who have and are serving in their respective armed forces around the world to stand and be recognized. As you know, the Invictus Games use the power of sport to inspire recovery, support rehabilitation, and broaden awareness of the unique issues that affect people who serve their country and their families. We are delivering much more than just a high-level sport competition. Adaptive sport is also a very effective form of therapy for the soldiers who participate in these games. The Games motivate hundreds of competitors to train for months at very high intensity, to push themselves to perform to the limits of their abilities. The Games inspire thousands more soldiers and veterans to maintain a positive outlook and to strive to achieve more than what they thought was possible. And the Games encourage the development of new recovery methods and devices that will benefit the soldiers and veterans of today and tomorrow. And the best way to continue that important work is to tap into the leading-edge research and innovation that is happening through the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research at more than 50 academic research universities across Canada and around the world. From the beginning, we have always believed it was important for us to fully understand the impact of these games and adaptive sports, and how they play in the lives of the competitors and their families. In sports, there's often a starting line. For Invictus competitors, that starting line isn't the yellow mark drawn across the track. The starting line is the day they say yes. Yes, I will get out of bed and go and try out. Yes, I will put in the hours of grueling training. Yes, I will stand shoulder to shoulder with my fellow soldiers and represent my country once again. Yes, I will compete in the Invictus Games. Well, our organizing team for these games had a starting line too. And it wasn't deciding on the venues or which nations to invite or even what sports to include. Our starting line was research. That is why we're delighted to announce today that the Invictus Games Toronto 2017, in partnership with the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research, is releasing the preliminary findings of the first ever independent research study on the impact of the Invictus Games and adaptive sports on ill and injured, wounded soldiers, veterans, and their families. This research study has been conducted by Dr. Selina Shirazapur from Dalhousie University. It explores the role of adaptive sport in the rehabilitation of service members and their families. It is based on a comprehensive evaluation of the competitors participating in the 2017 Toronto Invictus Games. This research is crucial. It will provide a platform for evidence-based policy making that will support the further development of sports programs and events for wounded warriors and veterans in Canada and around the world. This study is the first of its kind. There has never before been a comprehensive study of competitive sporting events developed specifically for service members and veterans. The Invictus Games has a mission: to use the power of sport to inspire recovery, support rehabilitation, and generate a wider understanding of and respect for those who serve their countries and their loved ones. We're confident Dr. Shirazapur's findings will help us understand whether the Invictus Games is successful in fulfilling that mission, and that it will take us across the finish line. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, for that exciting announcement. CIMVHR truly has no greater friend than Michael Burns. We're privileged to be here in the midst of the Invictus Games. The inspiration it takes to drive your research forward is manifested in the efforts of these incredible athletes. We are honored to have with us this morning an alumnus of Team Canada who participated in both the London and Orlando Games. S'il vous plaît, souhaitez le bienvenu à Stéphane Moreau.
Good morning. My name is Stéphane Moreau. I competed for Canada at the 2014 and 2017 Invictus Games. I grew up in Quebec City, and I joined the Navy in 2000. In 2004, I was involved in a military accident that left me with a post-traumatic stress injury. It took me 6 years to be able to tell a health professional how the accident affected me, as I thought I was weak and probably the only one affected. After telling me that she was treating at least 10 people regarding this accident, I started to feel less pressure about opening up. The psychologist that treated me was working off base and was contracted by DND. I tried to create a connection with a psychologist on a base, but it didn't work for me as the anxiety was too high. The mental health offices on the base were on the second floor of the base hospital. I didn't want anyone to see me going to the second floor as I was afraid to be judged. And that's the reason why I went to the off-base facility. Having that option was great and very appreciated. My participation in Invictus Games changed my life, and it re-energized me and reinforced that I'm highly capable to overcome obstacles. Being involved in such an event alongside hundreds of athletes that also had to overcome many challenging situations really inspired me, and this is why it's time for me to be involved and try to help and encourage current and future competitors. I think that a program could be implemented where the athletes and their psychologists could work as a team. The psychologist could be presented with a letter explaining the games and what it entitles for the athletes, and he could arrange appointment with key timings such as pre- and post-training camp and pre- and post-Invictus Games participation. There's a big emotional moment after the games as everyone is back home and resuming their normal life. I believe having a post-game appointment would be greatly beneficiary. To conclude, I would like to share what I learned through my struggles over the last few years. In order to represent Canada well, I don't have to be in the military, play a sport for Team Canada, or compete at Invictus Games. All I have to do is to be polite, respectful, considerate, and non-judgmental, because that's who we are. Thank you.
Stéphane, je vous remercie de vous être joint à nous et de continuer de servir le Canada. We thank you, Stéphane, for your continued service to Canada. A moment ago, Alice and Michael told you a little bit about our next speaker. We're very proud that CIMVHR has been able to support her work, and we look forward to hearing much more about it. Please welcome Dr. Selina Shirazipour.
Good morning. I am thrilled to be here today as a researcher in sports psychology and health promotion, and as someone whose own research path was started by the initial launch of the Invictus Games. When we look at the existing research on military sport recovery, particularly the psychological and social aspects of participation, which are my focus, we see that researchers have done a really great job at establishing the short-term benefits of participation. So those psychological aspects of identity that happen right after and the few weeks after participation, or that social reconnection that happens. And the evidence is particularly strong when we look at therapeutic recreation, things like recreational sport, outdoor nature-based activities. But we do have some key knowledge gaps, particularly few investigations about whether these benefits and how these benefits are maintained long-term, which is really essential to get the support behind programming and for policy development. We also have rarely looked into the role that family and friends play in sport recovery and how they may provide support or even achieve recovery through sport participation. And finally, there is still so much more we can learn about competitive sport experiences. We need this rigorous research-based evidence to fill these gaps because during recovery, we have no opportunities for error. We have to know. We have to know what types of programs and experiences, what elements of an experience achieve long-lasting, meaningful outcomes. Because having spoken with many service members and veterans with illnesses and injuries over the past few years, what's clear is that one negative participation experience, and we lose that trust, we lose that window to intervene and help turn things around. So based on those gaps and a desire to fill those gaps, it's been a pleasure over the past year to be working with Toronto 2017 to explore the role of sport in recovery for our service members and veterans and for their families through the lens of Toronto 2017. And this is being achieved by looking at the many different dimensions that are central to the Invictus Games and sport in general. So starting at the most basic level with the competitors, we've been interviewing and starting surveys with competitors that are going to continue into 2018. We've also started interviewing family and friends, understanding what they think of the sport participation and how they can be better supported through the Games. And also, last year, we started surveying Canadians across the country to understand how they see our service members and veterans and how sport may impact those perceptions, and thus the place of our military personnel with illnesses and injuries in Canadian society. My focus for today's presentation is on the interviews that have been conducted with our former and current competitors, because I feel that these interviews and these quotes provide us with some really rich data about the experiences that individuals are having with the Invictus Games. I've had the extreme pleasure over the last few months of being able to interview 40 of our former and current Invictus Games competitors. The idea being that I wanted to reach out to individuals from as many nations as possible, and also had as many range of an illness and injuries as possible, from operational stress injuries, physical illnesses, to physical injuries as well. But what we saw really early on is that they all had one fundamental story that they wanted to share, whether despite their background, their nation, the injury that they were experiencing. The story they wanted to share and the clear theme that came through so early on, no matter how many other people I interviewed to see if we were missing something, was that sport, and particularly Invictus, is a transformative experience. I could have taken a quote from any of the 40 interviews, but I think it's summed up really quite clearly here when we have one competitor that hadn't even participated in the Games. He'd only been through 6 months of training with Team Canada, and he felt for him that it had stopped him from committing suicide, that it had turned his life around. And so based on this feedback, my goal is to take you through that journey and that transformation. And so with that journey, we can divide it into 3 parts, very clearly, as Stefan mentioned. The idea of that training and life before the Games, what's happening right now in Toronto with these 8 days, the Games themselves, and then life after the Games. When we think about training, what we might see initially prior to intervention, as many of you know, in some of the worst scenarios, can be initial isolation, struggles, potentially even difficulties with family members and in one's community. And what we found is that making the team and knowledge of the large scale of the Games gave some individuals the permission and the motivation they needed to put effort and resources into their recovery, because they had a team relying on them. There was that military mentality that I can't let my team down. I got this spot over someone else. In some nations, it is extremely competitive to get a spot on these teams. So they felt that responsibility. And then the transformation started right away, because they had to leave their house. They had to leave the basement to find a coach, to learn how to train, to get equipment. And so right at the beginning, we're seeing this social reintegration and a rebuilding of identity and confidence. For some individuals, this training could potentially be anywhere from a few months to a year or more, and then we come to the Games. And there are so many themes that I could have picked out to speak with you about the key elements of the Games, but there are a few in particular that I'd like to highlight. And the first is the importance of the public, particularly for competitors from countries that are less vocal in their support of their military, such as Canada. The fact that they are being celebrated and recognized on this large scale, that so many people are like, they're actually paying to come and see me participate and see my recovery and see me do sport, is really impactful. And I can tell you, at the opening ceremonies, I started preparing for my post-Games interviews, because I know there are going to be a lot of emotions, particularly on the part of Team Canada, when we talk about that moment when they all walked out and the entire ACC got to its feet. This large-scale recognition is really valued moments that they're not necessarily used to, and particularly for individuals with illnesses and injuries that might make them feel that they're not always accepted by the public, or they might be uncomfortable in the public. this is a really key moment of feeling some acceptance. Another aspect which really won't be new to anyone is the return to military family and camaraderie. Someone called it the world's biggest military. The world's biggest family was their military as soon as they came into the lobby of the village, or even the idea that being reconnected was the glue they needed to be a part of a family again and to put themselves together. And there can be no overemphasizing of the importance of peers, and we have so much of this in the literature, for motivation, for learning how to cope with injury, because there's this basic understanding of the experiences they had in the military, of the experiences that they're having with illness and injury that no one else can get, and so they don't need to have any explanations when they show up. They're just starting at a shared understanding and point. A third element, which was also brought up in the opening ceremonies, was the idea of being able to once again represent your country on an international stage. And so, to quote several participants, and as you may have heard if you've been following the coverage, the idea of once again wearing their country's flag on their shoulder. Because for so many competitors or so many participants with illnesses and injuries, they may not have left the military or have taken off the uniform on their own terms. And so the fact that they can once again wear the flag, compete for their country, provides a new ending to this narrative and allows them to then decide how it's going to end. And a final point, which I think is really key, because we see the Invictus Games really taking it to the next level in how we integrate family and friends. And we're finding that that is really valued. First off, sport, dealing with wins or losses or even just all the people around, there is the potential that there may be some triggers, there may be some anxiety, and having family there can really help them cope with that. But also, they recognize the games as this break, this opportunity away from home, away from work or the stresses of life, to celebrate where they've come, to thank their families through their participation. We then have life after the games, and we do see many long-term benefits emerging, and I'd like to focus particularly on two, and the first is a return to self. So the achievement of having participated in the games, having known that one has mastered something this big, has come so far, allows them to then take that into other domains. So from seeking employment to continuing and completing one's education, or even something really small like committing to small aspects of self-care. There was one woman that I spoke with from Australia who said that how she decided to keep continuing that idea of taking care of herself was by cutting her hair, because it forced her to actually have to do her hair every morning and take time for herself. So it doesn't need to be these big acts, but this idea that something is continuing that helps an individual rebuild who they are and how they want to feel about themselves. And second, as we're seeing through Stefan today, so many are taking on that idea of becoming a prominent advocate for sport and for the veteran community. And these are really valued because so many of the competitors, when I speak with them, they got into the games because someone else reached out to them, or they saw someone else's story in media coverage, and so they decided to participate, and they want to pay that forward. They want to share that message so that other people can take advantage of that as well and have that experience. And all of these come from a purpose, a sense of initiative and momentum that is built from being successful and reaching a goal and completing the games, whether or not one has received a medal. But also, as Stefan mentioned, there are these challenges that happen when all of a sudden you go home and it's all over. And there are ways that we can provide more initiatives and support in that time. And one of the things that I was starting to see in the interviews is that I'm beginning to hypothesize that we need to help our competitors set goals for what happens after the games, long before the games even happen. Because those competitors who had goals, such as education, such as employment, lined up after the games, seem to indicate having an easier time. And also, as Stefan mentioned, those that had support networks set up for what would happen afterwards. I think that was a really key point that he mentioned earlier. So there are a lot of key lessons that we can take from this, and I'd like to just highlight a few final points in my last minute. The first is the value of the Family and Friends program. As I say, we don't know much even within the civilian world, about the role family and friends take in life after illness and injury for adults in sport. And one competitor had noted to me that while he wasn't participating in the games anymore, his wife still wanted to be involved because he said his journey was over, but her Invictus journey, she felt, was just getting started. So how can we support the families and even support their recovery, not just as someone coming with a competitor? And second, if we think about the games as one step on a journey, as an important marker, an important goal, but just one marker on that journey of recovery, on that Invictus journey, it may help with some of those post-games challenges, and it may also help in terms of being able to continue to think about the importance of training and what can we do to help with that. We saw how crucial that is, even without participating in the games, but also how can we support initiatives such as access to care and support, access to employment or education, so that they still feel a part of their Invictus family and it doesn't just drop off after the games. And finally, like I said, all of this speaks to that what we're seeing is that when ready, sport Invictus can provide this transformative experience, this motivation to continue and to maintain one's psychological and social well-being. So recovery can take many different forms, but we are learning so much about how if someone is ready for sport, it can be a truly effective tool. And knowing that, one of the things that I'm really thinking about and that I'd like, I think as researchers, for us to think about as next steps is who is signing up for the recovery programs. So we have competitors that sign up, that put their names for the games and are having these benefits. But then in that case, who are we missing? Who isn't signing up that could use the games, that could appreciate sport opportunities or any type of opportunity? And how do we intervene to bring them to a state of readiness where they can start their journey? And I look forward in next year's CIMVHR Forum to sharing some of our long-term questionnaire findings, some of the longitudinal research we have from the interviews with competitors, with families, and with Canadians. And I'd like to leave you with this one final quote, because I didn't just choose like, oh, this one person out of 40 had the best quote and that's how I'm going to end it. This literally came out paraphrased in the vast majority of the interviews, the idea of sport, of the games, as having been a gift, as having been this element that provided this motivation, something different that was a gift for them in their recovery. And so I think from our preliminary findings, the evidence is clear that there is something special about this journey, and there's something special happening here in Toronto this week. So I hope you all have an excellent conference. It's been a pleasure being able to start on this research and share these preliminary findings. And I also hope that you all get a chance to go out to see the games this week and witness part of this journey for yourself, and that it provides the motivation and initiative for your own research that it has for my own. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Selena, and we look forward to hearing more throughout the years, so please come back to CIMVHR. Our final speaker honors us with his time this morning and this demonstration of support for CIMVHR's purpose. Please welcome His Royal Highness, Prince Henry of Wales.
Thank you very much, and Selena, thank you very much for that as well. I'm sure it will come as no surprise to anybody in this room that I am hugely passionate about the Invictus Games. I am passionate about the role which sport can play in the recovery of body and mind. I am passionate about the men and women of our armed forces who have served their countries. And I am passionate in my support and admiration for the families of those men and women because they too have served. In 2013, I visited the Warrior Games in Colorado. It was there that I first saw the impact which sport can play in the recovery of these men and women. I was amazed seeing the fiercest competition turning to respect, understanding, and friendship the moment that the finish line was crossed. I saw people giving it their all on the court or in the pool, but then hugging their opponents as brothers in arms. Seeing this for myself convinced me that we had to enable more injured and ill servicemen and women to benefit from the power of competition. And we had to find a way to stage a competition that could attract the attention of the world and inspire millions. The idea for the Invictus Games was born. The journey to the first Games was by no means easy. I gave my team 9 months to deliver a concept which few people had heard of and even fewer had seen for their own eyes. But as you know, we succeeded, and here we are at the third Invictus Games. In that first year, what we had hoped, but that none of us could have predicted, was the way in which the public embraced the competitors and the spirit of the Games. The support was unbelievable, and the guys and girls responded by putting on a sporting spectacle unlike anything seen before. For the competitors, we know that the journey to the Invictus Games is often not an easy one. We are dangling a carrot of sporting glory to help reignite qualities which have been worn down by months and often years of fighting. Fighting to find purpose, fighting to reconnect with family, fighting to get fit again, fighting to leave the house, and in some cases, fighting to stay alive. Sport, of course, is not the only answer, but it is a hugely powerful tool. People find motivation and purpose in many different things, but in my mind, there is no denying the impact that teamwork, competition, and fun has on someone's well-being and outlook. The why saying, I'd like to say thank you as the tears roll down my eyes. My husband is on the USA team, and when he's competing, I see him smile, a genuine smile. I cry because that's the one thing I can't do as his wife. It hurts me, but at the same time, I try to understand that it's not me. Our 3 children we call little warriors because they too have to adapt and overcome. The father, friend they once knew isn't the same. I wish I would have been able to bring them because they would have shared in his happiness. Thank you for these games. They truly were a blessing because his smile is something that we've missed. I'm delighted that Selena's research validates such comments. We believe that the Games would make a real difference. Competitors, friends, and their families told us that the Games were not only changing lives, but saving lives. And now, what we believe to be true has been backed up by this high-quality academic research. Now, I have long believed that individuals who wear the uniform are role models for society. Their families understand the true meaning of teamwork, respect, discipline, and leadership. And in a world where this is often lacking, I bet the values by which service families live their lives and the example they set for others through these games is having a profound effect on their communities and far beyond. Wouldn't it be great if we could prove that too? Thank you.
Your Highness, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our opening ceremony. We thank all of you for joining us as we officially kick off the 8th Annual CIMVHR Forum. We will be enjoying a refreshment break prior to sessions at 10:30. I now ask you to please rise, if you are able, as our speakers exit the ballroom.